I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know I said maybe about 9 o'clock, but let's face it, I talk a lot and these are recorded anyway. Um, Really good job on the pinup. However, just wanted to go over, kind of our home base, if you will. Um, Very often I like to keep this pretty updated. One of the last links that I put was actually the YouTube, just in case you were still having issue finding the YouTube. You can also just type in Christopher Red in the YouTube. Anyway, Google Drive link, of course, has a new file for all the commands. I basically just made sure some things worked. And then, of course, we had pinup in the hallway today, and our assignment too. Right. So a little bit different. And to be honest, we have to switch this date. Right. So obviously, I'm assigning it today. Right. We'll basically just push everything back one day. So essentially, this exercise 2 isn't due until next Wednesday. Right. However, that doesn't mean, as you guys know, start later. Right. So we'll definitely want to start today. But just to read it out. So for our next exercise, we'll be looking into the deeper into the 3D commands that we can utilize for architecture design abstraction. The point of this exercise is to practice modeling, but also refers to our learned skills of Design 1 composition. For this exercise, we will focus less on the process and more of the product of the object itself. Using Boolean operations, sweep 1, sweep 2, pipe, network surface, lofts, or polycurves, we can set out to make a spaciously interesting compositional object. Follow the step-by-step instructions to again show the step-by-step order of operations and to ensure efficiency of the modeling workspace. So, pretty familiar, right? And just to get into it, of course, asking for another 11 by 17, and this time just a minimum of 3 steps. Now, I know that maybe sounds easier. It's actually a little harder to express what I'm doing in only 3 steps. So it'll actually increase some of our, maybe our critical thinking on what we actually want to show. Because clearly we have 5 steps. So maybe that first one of just showing the beginning box, maybe that one gets knocked out. Anyway, and just to reiterate, this is incorrect. And we're pushing basically each day. I don't know if I can draw on this at the same time. Okay, there we go. Obviously, today is the day we're going over exercise 2. So, just wanted to fill in. So let's get right into it. And let's go ahead and open up my downloaded file from the Google Drive. That's fine. So we went over some of the 2-dimensional commands. Maybe a little bit, right? Definitely have used trim. I wouldn't say we've probably used fillet yet or anything like that. But today we're definitely going to be talking about the 3-dimensional commands. Some of my favorite for sure are like sweep and sweep 2. Network surface is definitely one of my favorites. I mean, that just looks like a roof from above. But let's definitely exercise with these and check them out. So our first step is 25 by 25, 25 box. So let's go ahead and type in box. I like my origin at 0, 0, 0, so I'm going to type 0, 0, 0, enter. 25 feet, enter. 25 feet, enter. 25 feet, enter. Right? Eventually you get really good at playing this piano, right? We got our box, right? I do want to stay organized, so in my case, like last time, I'm going to make a rectangle over mine and stay organized. I have a feeling it's going to get wild. And I'll go ahead and make a copy just because, I don't know, I always do that. Anyway, step 1, like I said, step 2. So we already made our box. What does step 2 say? Apply 3 subtractions of space to the box. That's pretty big. Only in the X and Y axes. Oh, that's pretty specific, right? So it looks like I get to make up 3 subtractions of space and subtract it from my box, but I need to do it only in the X and Y axes, right? Fair enough. So in reiterating that, we do have our axes here, right? So we have our x-axis in red. We have our y-axis in green. So I'm pretty much going to only allow my subtractions from this sort of elevational views of this box. Does that make sense? I'm not going to go straight up and down because that would be the z-axis, right? Or axis. I know a lot of people correct me on that. It's not an axis, it's an axis. Anyway, tomato, tomato. So let's go ahead and make those subtractions first. It does say apply 3 subtractions of space, and well, the assignment is about these operations, so maybe we should test out some of these operations. So let's go over maybe some sweep, maybe pipe or network surface, right? Let's check some things out. Well, I guess I don't really need a surface, but I need to select some objects. So let's choose a regular object, maybe, I don't know, a cone. Cone's pretty regular. So I'm going to say it's about that big, about that tall, and I've got a cone. If I wanted it any bigger or smaller, I could have gumball on, and use as necessary. So we're not really doing anything to scale yet, so it's kind of fine for now if you want to play around with the objects and mess around with things. In my case, I only want to affect the x and y axes, so I'm going to try and keep it out of my z axis planes, right? I might need to right click, go to ghosted view, so I can see actually what's happening inside. However, that might still not be apparent on the projector. I apologize. But that's something interesting. We'll definitely call that maybe number 1. Let's come up with another. So I do have this sweep tool. I do have some other options of making objects, right? In fact, I can Boolean union 2 objects and make something. Sweep 2 looks pretty cool. And I could use pipe, right? So again, just kind of testing things out and playing around with my composition skills. I'm going to go ahead and make a line and perform a sweep. So maybe I draw this from the top. I'm going to say this is just something wiggly, right? Just to kind of show off what sweep can do. That's pretty wiggly. So for sweep, what I need is a rail curve, so something for this operation to follow, and a profile. So basically the section of this object. So in my case, I'm going to go to a different view. There's that crazy line I just made. So the importance of just because you draw it in one view doesn't mean that it looks like that in another, right? If I wanted to fix that, however, of course I could just flatten it, right? However, I kind of like that. It's kind of neat. I'll keep it. Happy accident, right? However, I do need a profile of some sort. I can make it my own. So let's say I wanted my profile to be, I don't know, some weird L shape. I definitely could. So I'll take that closed profile. That's important. It does need to be closed. And it needs to be generally at one end of the rail. Typically in the perpendicularness of the initial rail. Does that make sense? Right, I'm getting pretty close to perpendicular. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but I'll of course show you why. So we'll go ahead and perform sweep. I can even just type in sweep. Of course, there's sweep 1 and sweep 2. 1 is 1 rail, 1 is 2 rails. So it says select rail first. Selected. Select sweep shapes. Selected. Press enter. Enter, and it creates basically a section over that curve. Now we can rebuild it. We can do lots of things. We can make it very smooth and say 450 lines on there. Can also crash my computer. And as you can see, maybe that was the wrong decision of going so many times, right? However, it definitely makes a very smooth object, right? If you guys have like kind of a weird thing going on where you're like, why can't I focus on the object? One of my favorites is the zoom extents tool. So zoom selected will directly go to it and refocus your central area, right? So that's kind of nice. But awesome. I have a pretty interesting object that I can subtract from here in only the X and Y axes, right? So maybe I shift some things around. Does the whole object need to be in there? Well, no, not really. That's pretty interesting. That's going to be not working, right? I need the object to be either completely in or completely out. There you go. See how that's completely in there? Sorry, you probably can't see that so much on a projector, but the object is going completely in and completely out of one surface, right? We got some weirdness going on, but you know, it is what it is. And lastly, let's get a third shape in there. So I don't know, let's maybe go regular with it. I don't have to get too fancy. After all, it is a compositional object, so I could even use a box, or we already have a box, so maybe, I don't know, cylinder? Why not? Let's get a cylinder in there. Or I don't know, I like ellipsoids. That's pretty cool. That's not an ellipsoid. It's not an ellipsoid at all. Oh, okay, we have to pick one. That's fine. That's a cool looking shape. Anyway, let's go ahead and subtract it from this side. Or straight through the whole thing. Why not? At an angle. Sweet. So now we're getting somewhere, and at least I have all my parts, right? I don't know what I'm actually going to use eventually, so I'm going to just go and make a copy of the whole thing before I subtract it. We know that subtracting, we can do a number of Boolean operations, but you'll notice that you have to do these Boolean operations one at a time, right? So let's take our box, Boolean difference. Of course, difference means subtraction. Let's get one at a time. There's one. Wow, good thing I kept that original, right? Just in case I need to show it sort of coming out, or you know, vice versa. Another option that I can do is, well, when I do that, so I'll hit enter again, or if I hit spacebar, right, it'll actually perform the same command that I just did, right? In my case, it's move, so maybe not necessary. So let's do Boolean difference. You can delete the input, or if you uncheck this, you can keep it, right? So I'll go ahead and do that, select the surfaces, spacebar or enter. That way I can start to go, oh, okay, I keep that piece. I do want to show my work eventually, so I'll sort of just slide that out, right? It's looking pretty good. Let's do our next one. So I'll take this one, Boolean split or difference. So let's try out split. Does it do the same thing? Basically, in this one you select both, and it basically trims it out. So yeah, essentially the same thing. But what's nice about this is it keeps a little piece for me. So that might be useful in explaining my piece of architecture, right? Maybe I actually have a two-step takeout. So I'll take this piece and this piece. Isn't that kind of neat? I mean, there's like a whole architectural project right there. Look at that. Anyway, but what's nice is we can decide to even keep the piece and show that surface area that's coming out. Does that make sense, guys? Right, we're tuned it in easily into a two-step process. And we probably don't need this line anymore, so we'll get rid of those. Lastly, let's take the last one, which might give us some trouble, but let's see. So we'll take it, Boolean difference. Actually, I want to keep that piece. That's going to be a wild piece. So Boolean split. This one might take a while. Worked. All right. So we'll take the original out, and we'll take the piece that it made. However, do you guys see a piece that it made? No. So it didn't work, which would tell me that either this object is too powerful for it, too complex, or something's wrong with maybe the object. So I'm going to go with shaded. Ah, there it is. So it's not a closed object. Let's see if I can close it so I can cap it. See if it's able to be capped. Doesn't look like it's able to be capped. Oh, there it goes. See how it's actually capped now? So cap can work in some cases. That's Command CAP. Are you guys familiar with the new lingo these days? When somebody says stop the cap, right? Stop the cap. Anyway, in this case, actually put the cap on, but don't lie, right? Anyway, so let's try that again. So Boolean difference, this object, enter. It's going to think about it, and it'll actually tell us if it's successful or failed at the bottom. So maybe not on the projector, but at the very bottom of Rhino it does say Boolean difference failed. So let's try Boolean split, because after all they are two different operations. So this would be good to remember what commands that you use. You could possibly use it in your diagram explaining to somebody that, well, Boolean split doesn't work. You can even show like a little cross out, right? Boolean difference, check mark, you know, all kinds of things. Anyway, let's try split. Boolean split failed. So it could be a number of things, and I predicted that it was because this object is sort of kind of wonky. So let's try mixing it up a little bit, see if that helps or not. After all, we can try it a million times. Let's try Boolean split. Enter. And I don't see failure. Look at that, it worked. So it definitely had to do something with the way that the object was intersecting with each other. Like I said, the more complex the object, the more complex the operation. But I did want to show at least something super complex, right? You don't necessarily have to make something super ugly and wiggly like mine, right? But again, this is just for the tutorial. So let's get these pieces out. So there's the original. And that's kind of interesting, right? I mean, you can even actually looks like separate pieces are involved. Let's take those out. I'll select this one so I can sort of move them all at the same time. Nice. Looks like we may still have some pieces in there. Maybe not. Oh, look at that. That's a whole interior architecture project right there. You can be easily inspired by your very own compositions, which is why I like to do these exercises too, because very often, what do you think I do if I need to design something really fast? I do this kind of stuff. This is my sandbox area, if you will, where I get to test things, right? And a lot less money building them, right? Especially time-wise. Anyway, so it looks like we've completed step one. Let's go on to the next. I'm going to take a copy just in case I need something. However, keep in mind, I am trying to go fast for the tutorial. Normally, I would say definitely be way more organized than, of course, that I'm being right now. I really don't need all of this stuff for the next step, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it because we already have it. And it looks a little cleaner, right? We can see kind of our final object and clearly see what's going on, at least spatially. Man, that is just terribly interesting. Oh, there we go. Probably don't need that. Wonder what it looks like rendered. Huh. How interesting, right? How hard it would have been to just come up with this randomly, right? I mean, if I asked you to go draft this object right now, you would laugh at me, right? Like, what do you mean? Like, this is the power of this technology, though, in terms of architecture. I mean, that's a dang elevation right there. I can see it. Anyway. Just to kind of show it off a little bit, you know, and how we can use this, of course, in our studio, which I think is the point, right? Ooh, nice little like hole in there. Anyway, next step. So let's apply 3 additions. Oh man, and this one looks like it has a little bit more requirements. So apply 3 additions of pipe-like objects. So I mean that's not really specific, but it's kind of hinting at something, right? I can either use the command pipe, or it says pipe-like objects. I don't know about you, but a pipe-like object is pretty ambiguous, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be straight. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be circular, right? So I could use sweep, I could use sweep 2, just throwing it out there for the tutorial. But for the sake of time, let's go ahead and make just 3 really easy ones. In my case, I've already shown you pipe, so we don't really need to address that again. Let's make something rod-like, so usually just means something very tall. Was there a question? No. Oh, sorry. It also says I can do it now in the X, Y, or Z axis, so I'm probably going to take a little bit more advantage of that Z axis as well. So let's go ahead and do that one for that one. I don't know. There's nothing straight about this except for the box, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to keep it straight. That seems pretty interesting, right? I kind of want to maybe, if I'm adding this, I kind of want to add to this vaulted space, if you will. I mean, why not? Sort of adding back to my composition of what I subtracted. I appreciate that. I like that. It'll work for me. I dig it. Let's also try another pipe-like object. However, that's pretty thick. Let me take that down a bit. Down, move side. Pretty interesting. Kind of horrifying, really, but all right. It's like a really bad logo for like an apple juice box or something right now. Anyway, let your imaginations go wild. Another object. So maybe get a cylinder, or a cone is kind of. I mean, if I get the dimensions right, a tube will work. That's almost quite literally a pipe. Right? And what's nice is I can change the dimensions. I can do lots of things, right, at the click of a button. In my case, I'm holding shift and keeping proportions and simply just playing with the model. So I don't know, I'm gonna add these. So I don't want to take away too much. Can it go outside the box? Why not? I didn't see anything in the direction that said I couldn't. I like breaking the rules. It's pretty neat. Pretty interesting there. And lastly, maybe since I'm adding, I'll go somewhere through that space as well. Maybe really tiny. Where's that cylinder? And second one, yeah, I was gonna say, how am I missing it? Anyway, let's get something really skinny in there. Usually pipe-like things are relatively thin. Going straight through. Maybe we keep some orthogonalness. I'll have it go straight through. But I do want to add these to my object, right? Now it says apply 3 additions of pipe-like objects to intersect the object. Yeah, I would say that definitely checks the box. However, I'm also getting pretty wild with the spices. I might want to tone that down a little bit. So I can, right? I can take those specific objects that I made and even make them smaller, right? After all, I am adding to this, so I don't want to get ridiculous. I do have to fit this on a piece of paper, so, and I do need to start explaining it, so that's, I don't want to set myself up for too much to do, right? That's looking pretty cool. Not too bad. Maybe shorten that one a little bit. Maybe there's a hierarchy to these additions that I'm using. Look at that, it's practically a Le Corbusier model right there. Anyway, looking good. Let's make a copy of it so I don't mess it up. In my case, I'll copy it since it's in the same step. Just kind of over here. And let's go ahead and make those additions. As you guys may have guessed it, it is Boolean union. Right? So I can add these additions. I can even add them, I believe, all at the same time. So I'm going to select everything, press enter. And I didn't see failure, so that must mean success. And the way that I know is when I click on the object, well, nothing goes away. I can also see that, you know, these objects are intertwined with each other, both on the inside of the object and the outside. Right? Pretty wild. I probably shouldn't have used such a high demand number of lines in there, but I mean, right there, that's already a piece of art. I could take a screenshot and print that out. That's beautiful. Anyway, this is what I meant by those outside abstractions, right? No matter what, you know, we're practicing abstraction. But again, I just want you guys to get used to these tools. I know that in Studio and all of your other courses, you've always been focused on the final product. Whereas in this case, we're not so worried about that. I want to see through that product how much you're testing the limits of this program. Does that make sense, guys? And the limits of yourself and what you can comprehend in this program, because let's face it, some people don't think exactly three-dimensionally yet, and they need to practice, right? This can be really daunting. You know, one of the first questions the student asked me was like, do I keep all 4 screens at the same time? And it's like, sometimes, yeah, right? You really have to, because you're looking at an object in 4 dimensions. I mean, it's pretty incredible. Anyway, so we have our object. About 20 minutes in. Good. Doing great. That looks like step is complete, right? I may need to think about how I want to show some of that. Obviously, I'm in a really big pickle now because that's all one layer. So I probably should have even made my own layer for this step 2 project, or this step 2.2 if you will. And again, as you can see, at least in this tutorial, I'm not being in any way organized. However, I've already gone over Illustrator, so I'm not going to get into that one on this video. So, however, I will make 2D for us. So let's get there. Looks like, let's see, step 3 finished, apply 3 additions, intersect object. Yeah, definitely did that. Lastly, I need to create a 30 by 30 unique surface. Oh, that's quite specific. What do you mean by unique surface? That's open-ended, so I'm going to make it open-ended. To slice the object into 2 pieces. Now that's quite specific. It doesn't say 3 pieces, it doesn't say 1 piece, because that would be impossible. It says 2, right? So clearly from this step I can basically interject with, or infer that it means I need to separate this into 2 objects, making a surface. So let's go ahead and make a surface. Now, at least from what I can see, network surface and lofts, right? Definitely haven't covered that yet. So let's make 2 unique surface real quick and chop this thing in half. Kind of saving this for later, just in case I need it. I honestly don't know if I do or not, so let's go to our next step. However, let's make a surface first and talk about how we make a surface. So one of the first things I said was a network surface. So I'm just going to make a network surface real quick. And in my case, elevation is probably going to be the best tool for this. I'm going to make it off in space over here and kind of double check where I am by, of course, clicking on something and going, oh, there's where I am, right? So I can make something outside of that. That's where I am, right? So on and so forth. So I'll probably make my surface about right here. And in case of network surface, what we need is 4 curves and a command. It's really awesome, actually. However, we need each of those 4 segments to be touching and make a complete closed object. So here's what I mean by that. This is where we can get all Frank Gehry style. Right, so here's going to be at least the elevation or section, if you will, of my piece. And I'm going to end up actually copying it 4 times just to show you how network surface works. So in my case, I can actually mirror this because I'm going to work smarter instead of harder. So I'm going to mirror it. I'm going to go at a perfect 45 degree angle. Right? Except my ortho's not working. Dang. Because obviously I don't want to do that. Here's another way. Copy it from that point onto the same point and rotate it. So take one of those curves, rotate from that point that way, and now I got what I want. However, they are perfectly connected because of that copying and the piece that I locked it onto. Now I can mirror it a little bit better, right? Because now I do have a point that I can lock onto and know that it's a perfect shape. Now I don't know about you, but that looks pretty darn unique. But what did I mean by network surface? So let's type in network surface. Should pop up. RF is another way for abbreviating surface. And basically for here we need all 4 curves. So I'll hit 1, 2, 3, 4. And now all of you have no excuse to why you don't have an awesome roof now in your studio projects, right? However, there's a lot we can do with that, right? It's clearly made a surface for us based off of those curves, right? It's definitely dependent on each of those, and we can control them too. So like we could say, I want it to be loose. I could double click my preview real quick and it'll change that for me, right? So there are, some sudden changes we can do. Let's switch it to all loose, see what that does. As you can see, it made the subdivisions a lot closer. Well, sorry, again in the projector, maybe not so much. But clearly it's made a unique surface for us. However, how do we split it with that? Well, let's cool our horses. I can make a million of these surfaces all day, right? Don't really need to show my work in terms of the lines I created that surface, but I could. I could also change it a little bit, right? That's also pretty unique. If you were ever trying to make a bag in the wind, there you go, right? For sure. But what's interesting is I could take that and turn it into an entire architectural project again, right? Now, in the digital realm, this is a two-dimensional surface. In our reality, is there really such thing as a two-dimensional surface? Not really. At least in our reality, we have to assume that, well, there's at least one layer of thickness of atoms, therefore a Z. Therefore, no such thing as 2D in reality, right? Which is why even some will claim that we live in a four-dimensional reality, time. Anyway, I don't want to get that deep, but at least for the sake of a digital realm, we need to actually make this three-dimensional. So we need to apply thickness. We can do that with offset surface. Right, so just like we can offset a line, we can offset an entire surface in this program. So I'll hit enter. You'll see that all the arrows pop up. It's basically telling us which direction do you want to offset. So if I click on those arrows, it'll go the opposite direction. If I click again, the opposite direction. I can tell it to go on both sides of an object, right? I can tell it to offset this, right, on both sides of that one and the side of that side. There's a lot of options, right? And of course I can control the distance. So in my case, I can be like, well, I want it to actually be a 6-inch wall. So I'm going to type in 6 inches, enter, right? I'll hit enter again, and bam, right? Now you have no excuse why you don't have funky walls in Studio. See what I'm saying? Anyway, there's a lot there, right? So I know I'm going pretty fast, but we do need a surface that we can abstract this into two different pieces. However, I might not exactly need that to be entirely. Anyway, let's make another surface real quick using the loft tool. So again, I will need some curves, and again, it's just my kind of preference. I always make them in my front or my right view because I like a sectional quality of what I'm doing, right? Also, let's face it, it just looks like a line in the top view. So zoom out a little bit. Let's say I have a unique surface. Let's do something crazy this time. I mean, why not? After all, we're just testing the limits of this program. So that looks pretty cool. And let's say I wanted to change over time. So I'm actually going to copy that, because why would I draw that over and over again? And let's go with 4 of them. However, I could use as many as I want. What's also nice is when I click on something, I get these control points that I can further animate. So in my case, maybe this curve slowly goes down. Why not? After all, I'm just testing it. That's looking pretty cool, pretty interesting. Maybe this one goes from big to high. Or large, right? Just trying to make a unique surface. However, I can't do that. See how it actually loops in within itself? Can't do that for a loft, so I'll need to take that back a little bit. That would be appropriate, and is still continuously one line. So let's take those, let's say I was done, and loft them. Press enter. Now you really have no excuse why you can't make a bag in the wind, right? Right? I mean, you could literally take visual data and turn it into an architectural project now. You get what I'm saying? I could literally trace the graph of, I don't know, random stray dogs in a certain area. And I could literally say my architecture is based off the data of maybe the population of a certain location. I mean, it could start to get a very deep concept where people start to go, wow, why is the roof so different? Why did you choose that space, Mr. or Mrs. Architect? Well, I will show you, right? And the reason I say this is because very often, if not all the time, architects have to defend what they're doing, right? So I'm trying to give you some ammo right now of where does that defense come from? Where does that argument come from? Anyway, so we again have a lot of options, just like the network surface. We can do tight, loose. We can preview. We can rebuild it to say 100, right? Not 450 like last time, and get a pretty unique surface. Right, we can even take a look at both of these surfaces in sort of a rendered mode, right, just to kind of get an idea of what's going on there. Man, it looks way cooler with a black background. Anyway, let's go back to, say, Ghosted, and let's at least complete the assignment, right? So let's split this guy in two. We do already have a copy of it. That way I don't accidentally mess it up, or if I do, it's all right. Let's try the network surface first, right? So Let's get that in position. I may need to go to some sort of rendered view, or just to kind of check it out and see what it's actually going to look like, or imagine. I'm essentially only going to keep one side of these, right, as my final object, so I don't want to get rid of too much, and it is pretty vague about how it wants it split, so it doesn't necessarily have to be one way or the other. We could also try multiple things. So for instance, maybe I want to set myself up before I accidentally chop up that object. I also need to get out of rendered view, or my computer might crash. So maybe I want to try it 3 different ways, right? I could try it cutting it like this. I could try it cutting it like that. I can also try cutting it like this. Bless you. Right, so we can actually test some things here. It's getting a little wonky, so I may need to, not sure what that is, get rid of it, get out of here. But let's go ahead and split this. So I can take this area, if I do trim, and click on one side of my object. As long as it goes straight through the object, I should be able to get rid of everything. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I need the surface to go completely through the object, and in our case, it's not, right? Especially right there, right? Of course, it needs to go straight, completely through the object. Otherwise, it'll be like, oh, did you mean everything? Right? It's quite a literal program if you haven't noticed. So let's go ahead and make that a little bit bigger. In my case, I'm just going to hold Shift and make sure that it goes through the object. Does that make sense, guys? Right? Definitely going through the object now, definitely going through the whole piece of the object. Fair enough. Let's try that again. So I'm going to get rid of this side, trim, and I do want to make sure that I click on the object, trim it, and voila, the other side is still there. Oh, actually went to wireframe. There we go. Pretty unique, right? Arguably, we don't even really need the surface now to kind of show off that final object, right? I could maybe show in my step-by-step, maybe that piece coming off of it, with our end result sort of having that unique shape. Right? Now, you'll notice they didn't really trim with it, right? I kind of want that surface, and if I hit cap, well, it might not work, right? In fact, yeah, it says unable to cap the object, and you bet, right? It's quite the complex object. So what can I do? Well, I'm going to put that back, and I'm going to trim it the other way now. I'm going to use this object as my trim. I'm going to select trim and click on the surface. Voila. And now it should be, of course, filled in. There you go. Does that make sense, guys? So we use that surface to actually fill in what that was. However, I don't have to stop there. I don't have to even go, oh, I have to end with this, I'm already done, right? I did make 3 copies and tried it 3 different ways, right? So of course I can try it this way. And hopefully you guys realize you can use really any unique surface, right? But this is of course how you'll trim it. We do have to make sure we go straight through the object. Let's get rid of the other side now, right? I mean, I don't know, test some things out. I don't know, there's something actually a lot cooler about this side that seems to be wanted to be chopped off, but again, let's test it. So, trim this side. I can click anywhere on the object, it's going to delete it. But as you guys know, I need to trim the other piece. Oh, sometimes your Rhino will go into wireframe mode if it's like heavily processing on your computer, especially on the Mac for some reason. Not really sure why, but just in case you're wondering why it suddenly goes to wireframe on your computer too, that's definitely the reason. So we'll take this again, trim, click on the surface, it'll trim it for us, and basically fill it in for us. That way, it's not all open like we saw. Could even do a rendered view. I don't know about you, but man, abstraction's got nothing on us. Hopefully you're seeing that you can pretty much make anything you set your mind to in this program. Don't get me wrong, most people can't do it in their first time of Rhino, but there's a reason I love this program and I love 3D printing. I can visualize something, I can have a dream in the morning and have a final object by night, right? I mean, that's how That's how awesome this technology is getting. And one day, I dare say, you're going to think it and be able to just print it. Right? Control your computer just by thinking. How amazing that will be. Which is why AI will never take over at least our job, because AI can't flip itself on, right? AI is more like this light switch suddenly going, I'm alive, right? Anyway, we're always going to be needed for these steps, right? I could calculate 1,000 times and tell AI word for word to do all this, and it wouldn't even come up with the same result. That's how funny that is. Anyway, let's make sure and double check. We lastly create a 30 by 30. Yeah, I probably should have got that right. I was just basically trying to say that you're going to need a bigger shape than the actual size. Does that make sense? It doesn't necessarily have to be 30 by 30, but that object would technically work, right? And then step 5, show a simple diagram, 3-step max. So I will leave that up to you and your discretion, because if I go over that, everybody comes up with step 1 through step 5. And as you can see, I wanted to put some inspiring material, right, of different objects and different abstracted objects. What I would say, guys, is definitely test these things, right? Don't just be really simple with it, unless you're still struggling with the program. If you're still struggling with the program, move on from assignment 1 and get right on assignment 2, because really it's the same thing but different stuff. And again, it might help you really understand the interface of this program a little bit better, right? However, before I quit the tutorial, right, let's go ahead and make 2D some of our pieces. Right, maybe I don't need that first one. I definitely like my first object, but I also don't know how to explain it without all these pieces, so I might need to get all these pieces. So one of the things I wanted to go over, because I wasn't specific about the isometric view now, right? So I did want to show you that you can control your camera a lot more than you think. So if you type in camera and you hit show, right, nothing happens, right? But if I go to perspective, right, it's actually going to show me where my perspective camera is. So check out this little cone, if you will. Once I move, it's actually moving my camera. If I zoom in, it even zooms onto this object, right? And it's giving me an exact representation of what I'm seeing. This is awesome to have. I don't know about you, but I wish I had this in real life. I could see like my cone, right, if you will. But what's nice about it is we can control it significantly. So I can take these points, I can make it super dramatic and like change my f-stop, right? Now don't get too fancy with the spices, but I want to see what you're able to do now, right? Especially now that I said it could be a 2-point perspective, doesn't necessarily need to be isometric anymore. So maybe that's the view that I want. However, I want to make sure that I always get this view. So I'll right click on perspective. I will set camera, or sorry, set view, and go to my named views. Alright, so show named views panel. It's going to bring up this little camera for me. And basically I can hit this plus mark on a Mac. On Windows, I do need to actually hit the plus button. It's just in a different spot, right? So I'll hit plus. I'll call this step 2 or step 1, right? Whichever one that it may be. That way, if I accidentally mess up my camera view, if I double click on this, boom, I've got the exact view. And why that's important is because when I make 2D something, I need the exact view, right? Or at least it's very good practice to have. But I may accidentally mess up. If I double click, again, I get that exact view. Make 2D. Enter. Again, just because I forgot it last time, make sure to maintain my layers. So maintain source layers. Apply. Zoom out a little bit and it'll make it about right here, is my guess. Awesome. And if I zoom in, that is the exact view that I need and that we know and love and so much appreciate now. However, a lot of what I saw, at least in the first assignment, is you guys don't realize you can simplify this drawing further, right? You don't necessarily have to keep what you got exactly. In fact, we can still fake it till we make it. So you'll notice that they come in groups, right? I can ungroup something. And I can even further change its layers, right? Maybe there's certain lines that I think are getting too confusing and I want to delete them, right? Maybe I don't need those. maybe that's also too confusing, and there's a lot of lines in there, so I don't want that one either, right? Maybe this is even more confusing, and I need something to actually connect. So I can move that point. As long as I have point on here, yep, got point. I can take this point and even connect it to my other lines, right? And fix things. That already looks a little bit better. Now I may need actually another line there, so copy. But again, I can further fix it. Does that make sense, guys? And right now I'm just basically fixing those lines. So just kind of completing my shape. Remember that weird L shape we came up with? There it is. But definitely looks better than what I got out of Make 2D. Don't always just think Make 2D is going to do the perfect thing. Like I said, there's no magic button in these programs. However, there's definitely some nice ones, like Magic Wand in Photoshop, and of course Make 2D in Rhino. Right? So I don't want you to throw that out the window, that just because whatever this makes means we got to stick with it. Right? Keep in mind that I can even further trim this. Right? I don't necessarily have to stay with what I got. Right? Oh, something's missing there. Right? I could fill that in. Right? I don't necessarily want to draw it anywhere else but here, really. Does that make sense, guys? Anyway, just to kind of cover and review at least that area. Any questions about the modeling? Any questions come up, guys? Also, you can restart your camera. So if you right click, set view, it's basically on that step 2 view. So I'm just going to click back to perspective and it'll fix it for you. No questions, guys? I know it looks super complex. It looks like we did a bunch of work, but it was in fact only really just me talking a bunch and about 20 minutes worth of work. Fair enough?
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
When you do the disassembly or the explosion, like in the number 1, 2, 3,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to get a 2D of that whole process of it exploding or just the final block?
That's really up to you, and it's a really great question. So Robert's asking, like, could I also show like a 2-dimensional view of my operations? Can I just show it 3-dimensional? Can I show both? I'll let that be up to you, right? Because that is your bowl of cereal. However, keep in mind, you want 3 steps. However, one of those steps could have 3 things in it, right? Like perhaps Robert's suggestion. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yes.
Yeah. And I could even do the same thing to my top view. I can make 2D just my top view. It'll still give me a perfect flat image of whatever I need. Right? Great questions. Any others?
Could we keep working on the same font?
You could. I don't recommend it, but if you already have all your layers set up, what I like to do is delete everything. It'll keep the layers. I save as a new file, exercise 2. That way I still have my exercise 1 file just in case I need it, but now I have all the stuff I made already that I don't have to do it over and over again. So I know I just said yes and no to your question though, right? So yes, and you don't necessarily have to or not have to, right? Whatever you feel keeps you organized and working smarter, not harder. Absolutely. Great question. Any others? Well, then I guess we'll leave it here for today. I'll go ahead and upload this today in about 2 hours as well.